Hey everybody, Jon Schneider here from the Saturday Night Network, getting you ready for a very special edition of SNL Stories as we are about to talk to Mary Gross, former SNL cast member from season 7 through season 10. And I am so excited to present you this interview coming up in just a few minutes. But before we get started, figured I'd say hello to a lot of the listeners. We have a lot of new listeners that have come in over the summer as we have been releasing the Everything You Need to Know About Saturday Night Live series on our YouTube channel. It's been so much fun to get to do that, to get to go back to some of the old seasons as we're preparing for this 50th anniversary season. So far, we have released 10 of those videos on Thursdays throughout the summer. I'm very excited to announce that season 11 will be coming back in 1 week from now. So if you're watching this on Thursday, September 5th, that'll be out in the evening on Thursday, September 12th. Before we get there, we thought it would be fun to stop down and talk to somebody who was in the building for some of the seasons that we just reviewed and talked about on the channel. So Mary Gross, like I said, cast member from seasons 7 through 10. So in case you haven't seen those seasons, you got to watch those videos. And now we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive with Mary and talk through all of her stories from her time at the show. So I'm really looking forward to that. We are, of course, here as a presentation of latenighter.com, amazing late night television website that we work with all the time. And you should definitely go check out all of the work that they got going on over there. And we've had so much fun content here over the summer, including our look back at the greatest SNL hosts of all time. So that's a countdown series we've been doing every Monday. So in case you're just joining us for, SNL 50 coverage, it's a great opportunity to catch up on the backlog of episodes we released this summer. We also had some interviews with Denny Dillon and Gail Mathias from season 6 of Saturday Night Live that came out recently. We had our interviews at the Blues Brothers Con where we sent Bill Kenny and James Stephens down to Joliet, Illinois to go and talk to Dan Aykroyd, Jim Belushi, and many others. So that was a really fun interview podcast we released last week. So if you want to go check that out, all of that is available in the archives. As for the interview with Mary today, so James Stephens did join me for this interview that we recorded with Mary. Mary preferred to keep the interview audio only. So if you're watching this on the YouTube channel now, you'll be seeing my face as I introduce the interview that we did, and then you'll see me after the show, and we'll talk a little bit about what's coming up here on the Saturday Night Network as we look forward to season 50. So we'll talk about that at the end of the show. I'll come back and join you. But for now, if you're watching on the YouTube channel, you'll see an audio overlay as we'll put out this interview, and then of course we're not only on YouTube. If you want to check us out on the go, you can bring us anywhere by subscribing to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whichever podcatcher you listen to podcasts on. You can go and find the Saturday Night Network there. Subscribe so you never miss an episode. And whether you're driving or taking the bus or folding laundry, you could be listening to interviews like with Mary Gross. So I'm really excited about this one. Mary was super open about her time there. Probably one of the cast members that I'd say over the last few years we've spoken to that was probably the most open potentially about their time at the show. So I really appreciate how candid she was about her experience at Saturday Night Live. I'm thrilled that she's doing well and that we got a chance to talk to her. So I do hope you enjoy the interview, but I absolutely want you to let your thoughts out in the comments below. So tell us what you thought, if there were funny moments in the interview, if there were things that you wanted to hear more about and stuff like that, because maybe we'll have her back on the show one day. But whatever you thought, I love reading the comments. So please post them below in the YouTube channel. You can always find us on social media and reach out as well at the SNL Network. Okay, without further ado, let me take you to our interview with Mary Gross happening right now. Yes, welcome on in, everybody, to the Saturday Night Network for another edition of SNL Stories. This time here with an amazing former cast member, the one, the only, Mary Gross, who was a cast member for 4 seasons on Saturday Night Live from season 7 through season 10. And we are here and are so excited to get to talk to Mary. So, Mary, how are you?
Oh, I'm good. It would have been longer than 4 seasons, but I think it would have been longer than 4 seasons, but our executive producer, decided to go back to NBC Sports.
Right.
And that negated our contracts. I found that out when I was in Jamaica making a movie that Harold Ramis was directing called Club Paradise, a movie that poor Harold was not happy about. So whenever you see any articles about Harold, you won't see any reference to that movie. It's as if it was never made. But it was a great fun and had a lot of SCTV people.
Oh
In,
wow.
in fact, I think I was the only Second City Chicago person. Maybe that's not true, but
Do you remember the name of this movie?
oh, Club Paradise.
Okay, got it.
And let's see, Rick Moranis and Eugene Levy and Andrew Martin and my friend Robin Duke and
Right.
Robin Williams too, right?
oh, of course, Robin Williams, Peter O'Toole, um,
Brian Doyle Murray.
Brian Doyle Murray. I saw a friend of mine posted a picture on Facebook yesterday or 2 days ago, and it was a really great picture of Brian Doyle Murray, uh, John Belushi, Joe Flaherty, Gilda. I forget. There's 6 people, I think, and
Incredible.
I realized the only person still with us was Brian Doyle Murray.
Right.
Yeah, kind of broke my heart. By the way, I don't know who it was. If it was uh, you two who posted a little part of a SNL news segment. I don't know what it used to be called. Where I
The
was,
news break where you guys were having a love affair.
I thought I had, I have no memory of that.
Really,
You
because
two?
we do want to ask you about that for sure. So,
Oh
I
my
just want to,
God.
yeah. So we'll talk about it because maybe it'll trigger a couple memories. But just while we're going back to this film you spoke about, as so you had intended to come back for the 11th season of SNL. It was only when you found out that Dick Ebersol was not returning that you then realized that after 4 years that was going to be it. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think I was in Jamaica making this movie and got a phone call from my lawyer who uh, said, well, it looks like you won't be returning because your producer's not returning. So
Right.
everybody's free. And, in one way, I felt okay with that. But in another way, it was like, but all my stuff is in New York. I have to go back to New York and figure out, am I going to stay in New York? Am I going to go back to Chicago? Am I going to move to LA?
Yeah, I can only imagine. I wanted to ask, so did that include actually going back to 30 Rock, like in your office and grabbing things?
Oh yeah. Not much because I'm I'm thinking that at the end of the year we kind of tidied up our office because you just never knew what was going to happen between the last show and the new season. You just didn't know. I was sad to see that Punky Johnson, is that her name?
Yeah, Punky.
And that other
Molly
young
Carney.
lady, Molly. Yeah. I'm sorry to see them go. I like them very much, but the cast is so big.
Mary, you're still watching the show now.
Oh God, every week. It's you'd think I'd be over it by now, but I still do watch it. I notice when people are light. Isn't that funny? I think
Yeah.
that's the biggest thing I notice is if somebody's light in the show or doesn't have a scene or doesn't show up to the good nights. Isn't that funny? I'm
Yeah.
most concerned with that.
It's that well, that's that kind of PTSD or whatever, just memory from the show that you just can relate to that as a you're all sort of connected through this crazy thing that the show that is the show, right?
We are connected. Like, I mean, for example, one day I was in Beverly Hills going to a doctor's appointment, and as I approached the building, I saw a familiar figure making a phone call in the corner, and I just yelled out, Fred, and I'd never met him, but it was Fred Armisen, and
Oh my gosh.
I felt comfortable enough yelling Fred as if we knew each other. And I've done
That's
that
so
with
great.
other SNL. Yeah, SNL. Sometimes I mix up Saturday Night Live with Second City. I have to be careful. Uh, but other SNL people I've seen, I just yell out their name like, yeah, we know each other. So, and
And I'm sure he responds the same way, like, "Oh yes, there's my sister
oh,
from the show." Right.
he was really sweet. He got off the phone. He said, "Oh my God, Mary Gross." He said, "You were the cast that I grew up on." And then when he went back to 30 Rock, he took pictures of the 3 or 4 pictures that I was in on the wall in the lobby, and he sent them to me on his phone.
Oh,
Isn't that sweet?
so sweet.
Yeah, I'd
That's
never
really
met him
nice to hear.
before, but I thought that was very dear. Yeah.
These are the kind of John, right? These are the kind of heartwarming stories that, like, the listeners. I know they're eating it up. It's just so fun to hear this.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And we know we're talking about the end of your time at the show, Mary, but I do think it would be a great thing to go back to the beginning of your career and how you got started at the show, because a lot of people don't know how you got hired. Obviously, you joined the show in season 7 after a crazy season 6 with a lot of changeover. We get a new producer, some cast members that come in towards the tail end of season 6, and you're one of the people that we meet in season 7. So can you share with us your origin story?
Wow. It was sort of a miracle. First of all, I didn't know what my uh, goal was. I want to be an English teacher? Do I want to try to get into the Steppenwolf Theater Company and take classes there and do drama? What do I want to do? And then my dear friend Tim Kazurinsky started saying things to me like, "What do you think about living in New York?" And I looked at him and I said, I don't want to think about living in New York. I'm not thinking about living in New York because my family, my boyfriend, my life was in Chicago, and it just uh, gave me an anxiety attack to think about living in New York. And I knew what he was saying. He was saying that somehow my name had come up somewhere, and because he was already there, Tim. As you said, the season had started, and then there was a strike, I think. So apparently, and I just found this out sometime later, John Belushi and Tim had both recommended me. So the next thing I knew, Dick Ebersol and oh, I hate to say this, the late Bob Tischler came.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
that's so recently. Came out to L.A. and saw the show. It wasn't my best Second City show, but they saw the show, and I think truly based on John and Tim's recommendation, they made me an offer. And I said, "Can I think about it?" And they were so nice. I said, "How long do I have to think about it?" Once they granted me this time period, and they said, "Well, we'll need an answer like in a month." So, uh, my boyfriend and I went on a vacation. My boyfriend at the time and I went on a vacation up the coast of California. We actually visited Bodega Bay, which is where Bob Tischler eventually landed, and um, and I didn't know what to do. I had no idea what to do. And my boyfriend had an old friend who was a Buddhist, and when I mentioned my predicament, he said, "The answer will find itself." And of course, that was of no help at all. But The answer found itself. The first time I read that I'd accepted the offer was in the Chicago Tribune, and I had not accepted the offer, but
Not at
I,
that point, but it was written already.
yeah, it kind of pushed me over the edge a little. And again, I hate to keep referring to him as my boyfriend at the time, but he solved the problem for me, because I think what I was worried about was leaving him and leaving my family. I mean, I wasn't leaving them, but I was going to another part of the country, and what he said to me was, "Well, when Saturday night comes around this fall and you're watching the show, how are you going to feel about that?"
Mm.
And that was it. That was it.
That's very wise.
I mean, no one said that to me before he did. It was so clear cut, though, that are
Mary,
you
is it
going to?
possible that he was the one that leaked that you were going to accept the job to the Chicago Tribune?
No, no, he had my back. He wouldn't have done that. In fact, he did not want me to go, but he would never say that. So for him to say such a generous thing as, you know, think about it this way, it was so generous of him. And in fact, we're still very good friends. But that guy really had my back. And then other friends said to me, "Okay, so what? So maybe you'll do 12 episodes, and then they'll pay you for that, and then they'll cancel the show. You have no idea, you have no idea what's going to happen. Why not uh, enjoy the exposure, enjoy the income?" But my thought was, Isn't this a sinking ship?" I mean, that's probably a phrase I saw that was made in regards to the last season, that it was a sinking ship, which is very cruel, but I thought the show is so mixed up right now. Why would I want to go in that direction? But I finally thought of it as like 12 episodes instead of this serious life decision.
Do you remember? Uh, was the offer there when Dick and when they came out, or was it a phone call later?
No, I think the offer was they came out, and after the Second City show, we went over to a neighborhood restaurant that I'd never been in before, and that's where the offer was made, and that's where I asked them if I could think about it. Can you imagine the gall I had to? And then, this didn't occur to me, and I know this sounds really naive, but it didn't occur to me recently how annoying it must have been for me to say to my friends, SNL made me this
Mm.
offer and I don't know what to do. Could you help me? What would you do? Never occurred to me that that could have been annoying to fellow sketch comedians. I was truly, but I truly wasn't thinking of it as uh, the Holy Grail. It just wasn't where I needed to be.
Well, and it was also, I mean, I would imagine maybe what was weighing on you was, as you said, the some of those unfortunate headlines about the sinking ship or whatever. I mean, season 6 had its moments, right? And you probably had a little bit of that to just go, what is the future of this? And as you said, that coupled with the fact, I'm asking, coupled with the fact that that was not really, uh, you didn't have your eyes on that prize necessarily.
Right. I uh I I could have used more time at Second City. I mean, I only did 2 years there. I didn't do the touring company. I got hired to go directly on the main stage. So some of my friends had been there for years. They took classes, they did touring company, they did main stage. I didn't have a lot of experience. when this offer came my way. So I could have used a hell of a lot more characters.
Were you watching the original era of the show at all? Were you familiar with
Oh,
the original cast?
I don't think I missed an episode. Even though I was working at Second City, we were watching it in the green room when we weren't on stage. Yeah. And in fact, here's a here's a funny moment. One night when John Belushi was working on the Blues Brothers movie in Chicago, he would always come by Second City, and that's how he became familiar with what I was doing. And he stopped by one night. He was in the green room, and he was watching himself on Saturday Night Live in our green room, and out on stage, George Wendt, who was in my cast, with another lovely, brilliant cast member named Bruce Jarko. They were doing a scene called the Fugue Brothers, which was obviously a parody of the Blues Brothers. So here was John in the green room watching himself on TV, and at that very moment, out on stage, George and Bruce were doing the Fugue Brothers. So anyway,
That's funny.
it's like a little
So
house of mirrors.
I'm glad you brought up John Belushi because he really enjoyed your work and enjoyed you as a friend and a colleague and a peer. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Oh my God, John did something so sweet. I mean, I wasn't hanging out with John. I was working with his brother Jim, and I didn't even know John was that aware of me. Well, so my agent calls me one day and she says, "This is in Chicago." She says, "We have an audition for you, um, to play the wife of John Belushi in a movie called Neighbors. Do you mind? But they need you to fly out to New York like Tuesday." And it was Monday. No, it was Sunday night or something. And so I had to ask my boss at Second City because I was supposed to do a show Tuesday night. You know, Bernie Solins was my executive producer of Second City. I said, "Bernie, can I run to New York, audition for a movie, and come back?" And he said, "No, no, 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 no." And he said that because he was afraid that SNL was raiding his talent, and he was just getting sick of it, you know. And in fact, I, yeah, as legend has it, that's how they found Brad, Julia, Gary, and Paul Burrose is uh, a year later. Dick and Bob wanted to get talent from Second City, and Bernie said, "You know, go look in the little theater in the back." And that's where Julia and Brad and Gary and Paul were performing,
That's great.
and that's how they all got pulled to New York. But anyway, so John, so I went to New York.
Over at the
So
practical theater company, right?
yes, exactly. Thank you. And their motto was "Art is good."
Yeah.
And so I got called to New York to audition for this movie. It was all very exciting. I don't know if I'd ever been to New York before. I don't think I had. And my agent wanted to go with me. I guess, I don't know why. I guess she thought I was a Midwestern kid and I needed company. So she came with me, and there was a building on the east, let's see, was it on the east side or west side? I think it was on the west side of Central Park. And we went up in the building, and that's where my audition was. And the director was John Avildsen, who directed Rocky. And I'm not sure if I knew what I was auditioning for, and I'm not even sure if I had to read copy. Maybe they just wanted to. Maybe the director just wanted to meet me. But when we decided we were done with business, I think Danny was there, Danny Aykroyd and John, and the director, and probably a casting director. And when the audition was over, John said, Judy and I, his wife, of course, he said, Judy and I are going to show you the town tonight. And I said, I got to get back to Chicago. I have to do a show tonight. And I thought, oh my God, I can't believe I'm saying no to this. But so he was like, oh my God, you're kidding. Well, anyway, so he took me out on the balcony and he said, well, this is New York. And he, waved his hand over Central Park and pointed out what he could. And it was sort of dreamlike. And then I had to say goodbye and get on a plane and go back to Chicago and do a show that night. But it still feels dreamlike, because at the time John was on the cover of John was maybe the number one box office male for a while, I think.
Yeah, I mean, he had the number. There was that time where Saturday Night Live was the number one show. He had the Blues Brothers album was like number one on the charts,
Right.
and wasn't at the same time that was it Animal House?
Right. I think that's what put him. Well, maybe all those things put him, but Animal House may have put him on the cover of Newsweek. And so well, it was all very dreamlike, to have John embracing me and treating me like a friend who he wanted to entertain. And
Well, I love this, and just to interject, and I know we have much more to cover, but to just say this, not to, mention any names or whatever, but people have said of John that he has said, whether it just doesn't seem maybe 100% accurate, that just women are not funny, and he has gravitated, like, he had this relationship, I think, with Gilda that was very sweet, and I've just heard you over the years talk about how kind and supportive he was of you, and I just don't know if you have a feeling to just be like, no, that's not the John Belushi I knew.
well, he of course knew Gilda from National Lampoon, so they'd had a long relationship and a friendship. I mean, um, and me, I don't know. I couldn't explain to you what about me made him think I was okay. Uh, but the last time I saw John was maybe October, just before he died. I think he died in February, but I'm not sure. But it was maybe October when he did a cameo on SNL, which you may have captured in one of your
Yeah,
little.
it was actually the October 31st. It was the Halloween
Oh
episode that he was. It
God,
was right. Yes.
the Halloween show. Everything about that was so creepy, including it being John's last appearance on the show. But
And then he
when
passed away in March. Yeah.
when when he arrived at Studio 8H, he threw his arm around my neck, maybe a little too tight, and I was I was in the hall, probably on my way to hair and makeup to check on wigs or something. We were about to do a dress rehearsal, and he put his arm around my neck and he said to the room in general, "I got her this job."
That is
He's
amazing.
proud of you. Proud of you.
Yeah.
And I being just being cynical instead of thankful, I said, "Yeah, I've been meaning to thank you for that because I was so stressed out about being there." But anyway, that was the last time I saw John.
Right.
But so anyway, I spent maybe too much time talking about all that, but it
No,
was
this is great stuff, Mary.
thank you, dear.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it. I wanted to ask you. You mentioned, Dick and Bob Tischler coming out and seeing you. There has been a lot of conversation about, Michael O'Donoghue being a head writer at the beginning of season 7 when you're first starting your time at the show. From your perspective, what was it like working with Michael for that first half of season 7? And from your perspective, also, what was the dynamic between Michael and Bob Tischler and Dick Ebersol as they're all trying to figure out what this show is going to be in season 7?
Well, I think Michael had a lot of influence, and I think he was trying to um, create. He thought he had an opportunity to create a different kind of show, like more of a variety show than just sketch comedy. And not that it ever was just sketch comedy. I mean, the Muppets were there and other things, but uh, 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 but I think at some point, and I think it was around Christmas, they decided that they had let Michael decide too much. His influence was becoming negative. Um, I personally was present when just before Christmas, when we were supposed to, tidy up our offices and go back to our hometowns for the holiday for 2 weeks. We were called into Dick Ebersol's office, and again, being naive and optimistic, I thought, oh, they're going to give us a Christmas bonus. This was our first season, and instead, Michael O'Donoghue just ripped us apart. Just it was heartbreaking. He just said how disappointed, not disappointed he was, how we were less than rookies. We didn't know what we were doing. We had no special talent. The only people he could speak highly of were uh, definitely Eddie, maybe Joe, and Christine because she had a Broadway resume.
Yeah.
So, uh, so the rest of us were sort of left bleeding on the floor because he was so nasty, and it came out of nowhere. Uh, and I I was so hurt. I said something to him that, I mean, Michael was highly unusual, but I said something to him that was just uh that just erupted out of disappointment and anxiety about what he was doing. I said something like, you go around here as if you're uh, some special man about town. The way you hold your cigarette, the fanciful way you talk. I just started ripping back into him because I said, you're just a guy from a small town, as far as I know, or from a farm town or something. I mean, I don't even remember what I said. I just remember thinking, how dare they bring us into the room to have him do this? And I think Dick was shocked. I think Dick was,
He
my.
wasn't expecting it either, right?
I think Michael must have said he wanted to give us a pep talk, and that's what Dick expected, and instead he got slaughter. It was very unpleasant. I was I was more than willing to meet Michael halfway, but he did a lot of weird things. Like, for example, he wrote a sketch uh, that involved a whale with a blow. No, was it a person who had a blowhole because
That
because
sounds right.
because they were exposed to 3 Mile Island. It was this family that had all these deformities because
Well,
they
there
were
was it was it At Home with the Psychos?
could have been, could have been. I was supposed to play a ballerina who fell into a Christmas tree and fell on the floor, and I didn't do stunt work. I mean, I never had formal theater training. I didn't know how to fall into a Christmas tree and not hurt myself. And he called me, a big whatever for not being willing to get hurt for a gag, and also I had shown up. He wanted to do a special rehearsal in the writers' wing, and I hadn't shown up. The reason I hadn't shown up is I'd been asked to do a remote out on the street where I was interviewing kids to ask them what the meaning of Christmas was to
Oh
them.
my gosh. Yeah, the kids around Rockefeller Center
Yeah, this is
that
a
are
very
talking
famous
about
remote, James, because
right.
it has Seth Green in it.
That's right. That's right.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That's right. It's like you're talking about commercialism and all this stuff. Yes, yes.
Yeah. Like, or when I was a kid, Christmas was like this, and
Yeah.
so I was asked to be two places at once. I was asked to be out in the street it, filming this remote, and I was asked to be at a rehearsal. And so through the grapevine, I said to one of the production assistants, "Please tell Michael I can't be at his rehearsal because I'm out in the street filming." And I guess he didn't get the message because, again, he chewed me out for that. Like, did I think I was so important I didn't need to be at his rehearsal? There was just a lot of unnecessary stress brought by Michael. And it's funny, I later became friends with Carol Kane, and she said, Michael was one of my Michael was one of my dear friends, but he would do horrible things. She said she knew that I was terrified of cockroaches, and he would come over to my house and hang out with me. He'd go into the bathroom and take a giant rubber cockroach, put it behind the toilet. So when I went in the bathroom, I'd be screaming my head off. I mean, Michael was just a little sinister at times.
What I love about what you've described, though, Mary, is you're talking about this scene that you're supposed to play. And you're falling into a Christmas tree and all this kind of stuff, and how it's just sort of these memories have flooded back to you. Like this is like what 43, 44 years ago, and it's great, right? I mean, I just find it fascinating.
Well, I guess I remember the highlights and the lowlights and everything in between. The vague sort of scenes that didn't excite me or
Well,
something.
let's talk about that. Jumping to because I know
Of
John wanted
course.
to circle back to you said on SNL Newsbreak there was the thing with Brian Doyle Murray, but there was this shuffling that went around. You were at the desk with him, and then you were out on assignment, and then you were not at the desk anymore. What do you recall? Uh, all of that, just trying to figure out. I mean, it seemed like maybe Dick Ebersol was trying to just break away from what Lauren had. We're changing the name. It's not Weekend Update. We're doing Newsbreak and try to figure out how many anchors we're doing and all this kind of thing. I don't know.
When I saw your little time capsule and it said that I was replaced by Christine Ebersol, I thought, oh yeah, I guess that did happen. I couldn't really remember that, but I think they must have presented it not like this isn't working out. I think they thought, maybe my old boss at Second City called them and said, why aren't you using Mary Moore in sketches? She's a reactor. You should be doing this with her. Don't stick her at the news desk, something like that. And maybe they just did an old switcheroo to see how things would go. Or maybe they could see the terror in my eyes that I didn't like being at the news desk. I don't know. I don't know what happened or why it happened. I just went with the flow.
That's interesting.
The one other time that I'm thinking about this now that wasn't precisely the news, but was, you had these different call-in. Dick had these different call-in shows, and there was, Larry the Lobster and the voting, Andy Kaufman. But the one I remember, you and Piscopo were sitting at the desk about the vote for the presidential candidates, and most of the episode was geared towards that. It was very slant, kind of not a lot of politics in some of the Dick Ebersol era, but there was one show heavily devoted to it, and you were at the desk primarily much of that episode.
Boy, I don't remember a lot of that. Certainly, the most memorable voting event was the Andy Kaufman, and you've probably
Yeah.
heard an earful about that. I mean,
I remember, well, yes, and I will just say this and ask what you remember about it. That in the good nights, I believe it's Gary Kroger giving the results, and I have this image, this picture of you that I'm just remembering, like over his shoulder behind, and you're just like shocked. And I don't know if you're finding out in real time or not. What do you
no,
remember? Were you, or did you guys know?
you know what? I watched it on your little time capsule yesterday or today, and I think what I did when Gary said that we voted Andy off, or the audience had voted Andy off, I think I saw myself sort of throw my hand up in the air, like, well, them's the breaks,
Yeah.
But but the truth is, it was a very traumatic event because I guess we're allowed to tell these stories after all these decades, but okay, they told me that I had to go up there and say, this was this new thing where you could call in real
Yeah.
time. And so NBC said, "Oh boy, we're going to be really forward and we're going to do this. So let's have people call in and do the lobster thing, and okay, let's do the Andy Kaufman thing." So now when they told me and others, they told me specifically that I had to stand up on stage and say that we were going to take a vote. The audience was going to call in and vote as to whether Andy should be back on the show again. And I said, I said, I'm not comfortable with this. I mean, we all like Andy, I mean, of course he's unusual, but we before we were hired to do this show, we admired Andy. So why would we now do this? Aren't we part of the same community? Why would we want to hurt Andy? It didn't make any sense to me. And then I remember we were in my dressing room only because it was the closest one to Dick's uh, office while we were doing the show live. And we were all in there, and everybody was like, "Yeah, why are we doing this? In fact, we're not doing this. We're not going to do the show tonight. We're going to walk. We don't want to. We don't want to do this Andy Kaufman thing." And you know,
And so, are you saying this to Dick, or you guys are saying this amongst each other, like you're about to plot this?
I think we said it to ourselves, and then when Dick and Bob walked into my dressing room, we said it to them. We said, or I remember Tim Belushi or somebody saying, put on a rerun. You can handle it. Just put on a rerun. We're not doing this show. I don't know if it was Jim, but somebody. But I remember seeing Brad Hall. Everybody shaking their heads. Yeah, yeah, we're not doing this show. So then Dick and Bob left my dressing room. Then a little time passed. A little time. We didn't have much time. They came back in and they said, "Am I allowed to tell you this?" I guess I am. I mean, honestly.
Yes.
Mary, I think
John,
we're
let's turn to the phones right now and see. Call this number if you think Mary should tell us.
I was gonna say, I think the statute of limitations is
Look,
passed
I'm
that you can
still
tell us this.
afraid. I'm afraid I'm going to get in trouble. Listen, I'm going to
Mary,
get
I promise
fired.
you're not gonna have a light week this week. We're gonna make sure you get a lot on. You just gotta tell us.
Believe me, I have nightmares to this day about having a light week. But anyway,
Mary, you have this entire episode.
so anyway, Dick and Bob come back into the dressing room and they say, "Okay, we weren't supposed to tell you this, but Andy, this was all Andy's idea. Andy wanted us to vote him off the show. Andy wanted us to present this to the audience." And we thought, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense." I mean,
Right.
that's exactly like something Andy would do. So once we heard that, we went, "Oh, yeah, okay, that's what Andy wants." So, in one way it was like, "Oh, fun, we're co-conspirators with Andy." In another way it was like, "Well, that makes us look like real assholes, doesn't it? Like we're all going to vote Andy off the show. We're all going to go along with this plan."
It's especially, I mean, just thinking about like what is, and I'm not trying to put any disrespect on the show today, but I mean, that is, just leaves the audience going, what's happening? What's going on? Like, you know what I mean?
It was
It's
unique. They were changing the
yeah,
format, which is something refreshing, for sure.
yeah.
Mary, can I ask you a little bit about, you mentioned Brad, and obviously Brad goes on to host Saturday Night News Break
Yes.
in the later seasons. And I thought that, very underrated. I thought some of your guest reports that you would do on the Saturday Night News Break were fantastic. And
Absolutely.
I remember very fondly some of your comments. We fondly called them "spitting mad." I think that was what you titled them too, where you would go on and you would just rant about things that were bothering you. Do you remember like how that came together? Who you would write those with, stuff like that?
I did not write them. They did not come about organically. I did not choose to do them. In fact, the writer who had that idea, it was a thing that people have done with me throughout my career. Like, wouldn't it be cute if little, mild, married, soft spoken.
Just loses it.
Yeah, wouldn't that be cute? But for me, it was like, it was very, I hate to overuse the word unorganic. It wasn't the kind of thing I would choose to do or write for myself. But they kept making me do it. And if you look at my face, if you look at my performance, it's like I'm not committed. I'm not liking what I'm doing. I'm just
Mm.
doing it because I've been told to do it.
Because the irony of it, I thought really worked. Like maybe it felt uncomfortable for you, but I think all these years later, looking back at some of those moments, they do really pop because we sort of get to know you as a personality. And it's just very interesting to see the dichotomy between your personality and what you're presenting on screen during those moments.
Well, I think I'm going to believe you because I trust you, even though I just met you today.
That's very nice.
But I think, John, to John's point, it's like there's a similar thing, similar but different, going back to John Belushi, where he would do that report where it would just escalate into, spiraling out of control and falling out of the chair or whatever. But you sort of like
But no.
Well, this
Yeah.
was
But it was funny, but you sort of expected that from John Belushi, where what John is saying, and I agree, is here's Mary. It is outside of what we expect from a Mary Gross.
well, be 100% sure that it was inspired. The writer who wrote it was trying to. Uh,
Do you remember which writer it was?
yeah, it was Andy Smith, I think, Andrew Smith.
Okay.
And he was, clearly making a reference to what John had done.
Mm-hmm.
except with Little Mary Grows. Yeah.
That's very fascinating. What about your Dr. Ruth commentaries that you used to do?
Oh, that was, I actually can speak about that without too much embarrassment because um, I, I have trouble watching myself. And oh God, last year a friend of mine put together all these old sketches for me and sent them to me. And I was really pissed off at him because I said I don't want to watch these old sketches. But I didn't mind Dr. Ruth because she was a sweet person and a sweet character to do. And
Did you ever meet her?
oh gosh, yes. There was one week where it was Mother's Day. So, okay, I thought I'll do a Mother's Day tribute to my mother as Dr. Ruth. At the time, oh my God, I think the day before I did it at the news desk, or the day I did it at the news desk, I found out that Dr. Ruth's mother had died in a concentration camp. So I thought, oh God, I can't. This is sacred ground. I can't do this. But it was, I think I talked to Dick or Bob or both, and they said, no, it's okay. It's okay. It's just, it's just a sketch. It's okay. So I pretended like I didn't know anything about her real mother, and I gave this tribute. And as I sat at the news desk, I looked out, and oh my God in heaven, there was Dr. Ruth, just like uh, in the bleachers, very, very close to me. I mean, I couldn't look at the cue card without seeing Dr. Ruth's face. So I just thought, okay, just sell it, get through this. Um, Assume you're not trying to hurt anybody because you're not. And and then as soon as I had an opportunity after the show, I went up to her. And she's about half my size, and I went up to her and I said, I, I'm, I'm so sorry. I hope I didn't offend you. And she said, she was so sweet. She said, "Oh my goodness, no, of course not. It's just entertainment." She said, "I understand. There's nothing to apologize for." And she couldn't have been more gracious and lovely. But to be imitating somebody and to suddenly be staring at them on live television, oy vey, that was tough. But it all worked out fine.
Can I also make an observation about the Dr. Ruth impression that I think is interesting in comparison to the Spitting Mad ones? Because Spitting Mad, like I said, it's funny because it's so not you, and I think that Dr. Ruth is interesting because obviously, dealing with sexuality and talking about it so openly in a commentary is interesting. Because to me, you also played like a lot of nuns too, so there was like a little bit of a okay, like would Mary naturally be the person to be talking or impersonating Dr. Ruth? And I thought that was so fun as well to like let you have those types of conversations as Dr. Ruth, despite what maybe comes off some in other points as you being reserved playing other characters. Let's say.
Well, the thing that was so comfortable about playing Dr. Ruth was she was so charming. I mean, she spoke about sex without any self consciousness or
Right.
any taboo. I mean, it was. I I I enjoyed it. It was much more natural for me to talk about sex than to be yelling at the desk. Actually, I didn't. I mean, remember when I did comic relief tour? I was talking about people's penises, without blinking an eye. It just, um, I think that the joke I made on comic relief was I did Dr. Ruth on comic relief, and I said, you want to be able to look at your penis and say you look marvelous or something like that. And it was fun. It was just silliness. I mean, what's sillier than sex?
I think that's so. But John's comment does make me laugh a little bit because great observation in the fact that you did play a lot of nuns, and one that comes to mind is that sarcastic nun sketch. Do you remember what I'm?
Was Drew Barrymore? No.
Uh,
Oh no, I think I know. I didn't care for that kind of a. I don't.
Right, but it almost I've heard people say of the sarcastic nun sketch that Mary handled that very well, and that could have been a recurring character.
Oh
So
well, maybe it could have. I guess I missed the boat on that one.
well, but you, as you were saying, it was not something that you were real keen on for whatever reason.
I didn't like these things that were nice Mary's now mean Mary, nice
Right.
Mary's now angry Mary. I like, it's funny. There was a teacher at Second City who used to say, he would talk about your orbit of characters. Who are characters you can do, like that you can comfortably do. Like when they came up to me and said, uh, by they I meant our head writers that year, which were oh God, I'm so sorry. I know who they are. I'm just having trouble remembering names after so many years. But the one day the head writers were in my office saying, "We wrote a sketch and we want you to play Mary Richards, on the Mary Tyler Moore Show." And I said, "Okay." Like I thought I have never done that, but I'll do that. Whereas somebody would come in my room and say, "Okay, so I wrote this thing for the news, and you're going to play Joan Rivers," and I said, "No, I can't. I can't do that. That's too far from who I am."
That's interesting that you say the thing about the orbit, because one of the things and this point that you're making that I wanted to another just James observation and see where John goes on this as well is that your breadth of characters is really quite large and kind of on both ends of the spectrum, where I would say a Rachel Dratch, who I love,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
has a type. Jane Curtin, probably has a type. You played everybody from like Alfalfa and Pee Wee Herman, and also Marilyn Monroe. You know what I mean? It's like it's very eclectic and just one extreme to the other, and very well done.
Thank
And I don't
you.
know, but like I mean, you may what you might be saying about the orbit is that you might not feel comfortable, but you have to, I think, agree that there's a lot of variety that you were dealt.
Thank you. Let
Yes.
me clarify something.
Yeah.
I uh I chose to do Marilyn because I had done her at Second City successfully.
Yeah.
Even though I look nothing like her, I'm a tall, skinny woman, and I chose to do Alfalfa. I know I didn't choose to do it. Robert Blake chose me to be Alfalfa, who
Oh,
who he had
wonderful.
worked with as a little boy.
Right.
And as far as Pee Wee goes, I did not choose to do Pee Wee Herman because, to me, Pee Wee Herman was already doing a parody of a person. So why would I want to do a parody of a parody? It didn't. I didn't. I didn't.
Paul Rubens is doing a character. And did you ever meet Paul Rubens, by the way?
I did. I met him at Comic Relief. I was coming out of my trailer, and he was coming out of his trailer, and embarrassed to say, instead of saying, "Oh, hi, Paul," I said, "Hi, Pee Wee." And
I love it. I love it.
and he very, very kindly and politely said, "Oh, hi, Mary. I like the way you do me." And I thought, I thought, well, he's being nice. He's being nice.
Yeah,
'Cause
yeah. Maybe he thought you were being Dr. Ruth in that moment.
I think
But
I asked I think I asked the bosses if I could not do Pee-wee, and they said, "No, we need it. We need it. We just need an in one, meaning one character, one camera, which gives
Yeah.
us time to move around the studio. If it doesn't anyway. So sometimes they needed stuff like that, and you're like, oh, all right, for God's sakes.
I guess so. Let me ask you something here. I know from previous conversation or that we had, you've worked with lots of hosts while you were there. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that Ed Asner was maybe one of your favorites to work with, right? I mean, you had, or at least you had some pieces that during that episode, I remember you were remain fond of.
I
Am I
re-
remembering that correctly?
you are remembering it with 100% accuracy. I loved Ed Asner, and I I have a current friend who was a very close friend of Ed's, and I have another friend who's writing a biography of Ed. So Ed is Ed is never far away from my thoughts. I have pictures of him in my cell phone. I remember after I worked with him, I ran into him on the streets of LA, and I said, "Oh, I hear you in these radio plays. I'd love to do that." And he said, "Yeah, sure, you should be doing those. I'll mention your name." And I mean, Ed was a sweet guy, and we had some really nice moments as Mr. Grant and Mary Richards.
Right,
And
the cold open. Yeah, that was great.
no, it wasn't a cold open. It was a scene that involved the entire cast. And I'll tell you who wrote it. Marilyn Suzanne
Miller.
Miller was the main writer on that. She was guest writing, and she got the entire cast in this Mary Tyler Moore apartment situation. I was just saying how sweet it was to be able to say, "Oh, Mr. Grant," and throw my arms around him,
I know.
and
Wow.
and then it was actually Mr. Grant, and then we did a scene where he was Peter Pan, and you sent it to me.
Yes, yes, the old Peter Pan one. Yes, was a great. Yeah, you're. I think you were being critical of yourself in that sketch, but I think it's. I think it's very sweet.
Well, there was a friend of mine. I wanted he who was very close to Ed, and I wanted him to see that, and he loved seeing Ed in that. He thought Ed was very very dear in that. Um, Whenever I watch myself in an old scene, I'm usually trying to redirect myself. Like if I could do that scene again, I would make this choice here and this choice there. Um, but it was yeah, Ed was maybe one of my favorite hosts.
And Mary, you mentioned Marilyn Suzanne Miller as a guest writer. I would love to know, she was involved in a few different episodes, especially in season 7. Any times that you remember working with her, and what was that like?
Marilyn wrote the Marilyn Monroe song, "Downers Are a Girl's Best Friend," which I performed in a not particularly good wig, and 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 didn't have enough rehearsal time, so my dance steps were okay. I mean, I'm not a song and dance person, so all of these things were stressful, but
Is there a story about that? Sorry to interrupt, but is there a story about that particular piece in dress rehearsal and the costume?
I think the costume was okay, except it was a little too tight at the bosom. If it had been a little more loose at the bosom, it would have made me look bustier. But it kind of hugged me too much, and then also my wig came down a little too low, no, too high on my forehead. And if
I
it
thought I read where I was going was I thought I read at one point that in dress you were so committed to the character that even though some of the costume was leaving your body.
Oh,
That you just kept going, but that I may have. I apologize if I'm
I
miss.
I don't remember that, but it's entirely possible because you're sort of you're in another zone when you're performing. You don't know what's you could lose your dress and not know it.
Right.
I was going to ask you about also Margaret Oberman, one of your other writers that you worked with for a few years. I noticed that when I looked through some of the writing credits, there were some really good sketches that she was involved with when you were there. Any memories working with her?
Well, Margaret's on my list of people to call tonight. I'm still very close friends with Margaret, and um, there was a sketch. I don't know how it came to my attention. Maybe James, maybe you sent it to me, but it was. I was I wasn't crazy about my performance, but it was Eddie playing a hairdresser, and I was a lady of some means who was one of his clients, and we were just chatting while he was doing my hair. And um, the thing I found so satisfying when I look back at this scene, and I don't say that about scenes I've been in very often, but what I found so satisfying was neither of us were looking at cue cards. We were actually talking to each other, and we actually even um, played a little bit with each other. It wasn't
This is the right. I just so that anybody who wants to try to find this, I think what we're talking about is when he's being his Dion character, right?
yes, he was Dion, and I was his client, and uh, he was just talking about some nightmare he had had. He was very funny. At one point, I even laughed during the sketch because his character was so charming. And after I laughed, I said, Dion, I adore you, because I guess I had to justify the laugh, by saying I find you so charming as Dion, but I was finding him charming as Eddie.
Right. So that was an ad lib.
But Eddie was always a delight to work with. That sounds so phony to call him a delight,
No,
but
I know that's genuine and sincere for sure. Have you seen him, run into him?
no, many, many, many years ago, another boyfriend of mine was working as a sound mixer on a movie, and we went to visit another sound mixer, and it was a set that Eddie was working on. I haven't seen him in years, but I can tell you that if I were to run into him, I trust he would be very sweet. Uh, Eddie Eddie was a very nice person, and the myth that any of the cast members were upset when he hosted the show, when Nick Nolte could not host the show,
Right.
is pure myth.
It's
I
not.
don't.
It's
I
not
don't.
true.
There might. Oh yeah, like. Did we discuss this earlier? The one person. There was one person who was maybe upset, but just one.
Yeah, if one person has been known to sort of have been quoted as uh, being upset that as a cast member Eddie hosted, and maybe this person was saying, I didn't really care for that, and neither did the rest of the cast. You can't really speak for everybody else, is what
That's
you're saying.
right. That's right. There was, in fact, at a the last big reunion show they had. What would that have been? The
No, the
40th.
the 40th, yeah.
Um, Chris Rock made some crack about when Eddie hosted and how much the cast must have loved that. And after the
That's
show,
right. That's right.
I remember I wasn't there. I didn't go to that reunion show. unfortunately, I missed Prince performing, but anyway, um, Robin Duke, among other people, rushed Chris Rock after the show and said, "That's not true. That's totally not true. We didn't
Uh,
mind that Eddie hosted the show." So, like I said, there was maybe one person who minded that Eddie hosted the show. Nobody else.
well, thank you for setting that record straight too, because people, if you're listening, that's how rumors get started.
Exactly. I'm happy to set the record straight. I'll tell you another thing. Getting back to that Andy Kaufman thing. I'm sorry to go backwards, but
No, please. Yeah, this is great.
I was on a plane some years ago. I'd done a failed NBC pilot. Let's call it an ill-fated pilot. I'd done with um uh okay. Now I'm going to call her my friend, and I can't remember her name. Carol Kane, and we were on a plane from New York to L.A. And I was sitting next to her, and we'd become friends in the course of doing this difficult show. And she said, I'll never forget how terrible Andy felt when you voted him off the show. And I just was like, Carol, wait a minute. I got to tell you this. We only did that because Andy wanted us to do that. That's not true. I was with him. He said how much it hurt him. He was practically in tears, and I said, Carol, I beg you to believe me. It was Andy's idea. We wouldn't have done that to him.
So, what I want to ask you is, I believe some have said, as you are indicating, that yes, this whole idea was the brainchild of Andy, which it sounds very much like you mentioned the story earlier, where there were half the cast was in your dressing room going, "Let's not do this," and then producers was going, "No, this is Andy's idea," and you're all like, "Oh yeah, that sounds just like Andy." But wasn't it that it was a surprise? Like everyone didn't sort of expect that the results would be the way that they were. That was the part that was maybe shocking. I don't know. I mean, I
Yes,
wasn't there.
I think I think you're right about that. You know, my again, cycling backwards for a second. My very first night in New York, when I was hired to do SNL, they gave you 2 weeks in a hotel until you found an apartment to live in. And my very first night in New York, I called Dick Ebersol. I said, "I'm here," and he said, "Hey, why don't we get together for dinner with Tim? And would you mind if Andy Kaufman joined us?" And I said, "No, of course not."
Was that the first time you had met him or not?
Absolutely, yes. And so we went out to dinner, and it was just such a bizarre evening. I think the first thing that happened was he wanted to go to Times Square, and so Tim and Dick and I, trailed along, and he said, "Okay, I'm going to go into this chock full of nuts, and I want you guys to come in after me and sit at a booth, but I'm going to sit at the what do you call it? The
Counter?
counter. Thank you. I'm going to sit at the counter, and don't act like you know me. Just ignore me, and uh, after a while, you guys can walk out, and I'll catch up with you later." Okay. So what happened is we walk in, we sit down. Andy comes in. He sits at the counter, and he starts saying in this sort of crazy man voice. He says, "Did I tell you it was a chock full of nuts? Did I say that? It was a chock full of nuts restaurant." So he starts saying in a loud voice, "Chock full of nuts is the best coffee in New York." And he kept yelling this over and over, like this was a crazy person who had entered the restaurant. And So after a while, Dick and Tim and I left, and then Andy joined us. Then it was on to our next adventure, and we went by this house that was actually a place where there was some sort of, nude dancing or something. And Andy grabbed me, and we ran up the stairs, and he said, "Okay, pretend you're with me, and you're really mad at me for taking you there." And I mean, honestly, this was my first night in New York, and uh, I didn't even know the guy. So to be suddenly doing guerrilla theater or whatever you want to call it, I should have just jumped in, but I was feeling a little used, so I
I
did.
just love hearing this. That like what you're telling us is like he has this fascination of just testing out these scenarios that amuse him almost in real time in the public, and I'm fat. That's just fascinating. I love it.
Yeah, like you think Andy Kaufman is fascinating, and then you hear stories like this, and you're like, oh, okay, he's even more fascinating than I thought.
He's not only testing the public, he's testing his fellow performers' patience by making you go along with what he wants to do. If he had told you in advance, "Hey, let's have some fun and do this," you would have thought, "Oh, okay, let's have some fun and do that." But no, it's just like he just grabs you. "Okay, now do this." And anyway, so I half-heartedly did what he said. I said, "How could you take me to a place like this? What were you thinking?" I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know there were new performers in there, and so we did this little half-hearted uh, scenario, and I remember thinking, "Oh, he must think I'm just awful because I'm not totally committed." But I'm not totally committed because I don't like being
Yeah,
manipulated.
or yeah, used or whatever. But that's a great story, though,
It's kind of
Mary.
a
Yeah,
harsh
it's
thing
really
to
interesting.
say, but because uh, of course I was a fan of his, but that doesn't mean I'll jump into the deep end of a pool when I don't know how to swim for him because I just I just thought a little advance notice would have been helpful. That's all. I'm starting to talk like an old woman. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. This is awesome, Mary. I want to ask you about the cast transition from season 9 to season 10, if you don't mind.
Oh yeah.
At the end,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, at the end of season 9. So we lose Robin and Brad and Tim and Joe. Obviously, Eddie had been gone for a while. I'm curious, how what that was like for you to be one of the ones that stuck around to sort of lose the cast that you had been working with for a few years, and then of course they're going to bring on all of these, really famous performers to come in as sort of an all-star cast in season 10. So what was that transition like for you?
Uh, it was somewhat painful. It was painful because Robin also may have left that year. Um, these were my friends. I mean, Tim had recommended me along with John for the show. Tim was almost like a right hand man to the producers. Sometimes they would go to Tim for advice, and now suddenly Tim's gone because they're bringing in, you know, Chris Guest and Marty and Harry and Billy. Not that there was anything wrong with those guys. It's just that they were replacing our friends, and and I mean, imagine how Brad and Julia felt. They were a couple, and I on one hand it was like, ooh, Christopher Guest, he's cool, and Billy is nice. Billy had been on this show before. Billy was a very nice person, and Harry was mm, more complicated, but very obviously talented. and who else was there? Who am I failing?
Martin Short,
Of
Marty.
course, Martin. So Martin was sort of part of the family because he was a Second City actor. Uh, but it was difficult because you had survivor's guilt. Like, why am I here and some of my friends aren't? And you didn't know, am I supposed to be nice to these new people and embrace them even though they're replacing my friends? It was hard, but you got to do what you. I don't know.
And do you feel like that may have affected the quality of season 10? The fact that you basically had a blend of two different casts together?
Yeah, because in many ways they stuck to themselves. They basically worked together, except Billy. Billy was very generous. Billy, um, in fact, uh, that scene that I did with Ed Asner with Peter Pan, Billy wrote that. That was a scene.
Oh wow.
That was a scene that Billy
How did that
probably.
happen?
Well, it was something that was probably in his file cabinet. Here's a scene I'll do someday. And then he saw Ed and he said, "Oh, Ed would be a cute Peter Pan." And
Right.
that's how that happened. So
Very generous. Yeah.
yeah, Billy was nice. I always liked him. I still um not so much lately, but there's a cafe I used to eat at every night, and I would often see Billy and his wife out here in the west side of L.A. And Billy's always been great. But and Christopher was, you know, I'll tell you, I don't know if this is amusing or just sad, but one day, Christopher, I think I told this story to you the other day, James.
Yeah.
One day, Christopher and Julia and I were sitting on the bleachers. We're waiting to rehearse a scene, and it's an awkward little threesome. But we're sitting there, and of course, Julia and I have a big crush on Christopher because of Spinal Tap and all that. So uh, Christopher turns to Julia and he says, "You remind me of Pepper." And she went, "Oh," and he says, "I'm going to call you Pepper." And she says, "Oh, thank you very much." And so I felt a little left out, and sadly, I said, "Do you have any s- special name for me?" And he says, "No, nothing comes to mind." And I,
Oh no.
I was just crushed. I felt how pathetic that I had to ask.
You weren't given salt?
Yeah.
He would have
Salt
thought
and
he,
pepper.
he could have come up with something, but that's how he had that sort of brutal honesty that wasn't unkind. It was just part of his personality. Like, no, I didn't think of a name for you.
Share if you would, because you've told me this story. I love you, and because you were just mentioning Julia, I love the two of you together in, uh, the Ghostbusters thing. Who is your favorite Ghostbusters? And I don't know that very many people know the rewrite that you shared with me.
Oh well, um, so we were sitting with Margaret Oberman, and oh, it was just desperation. Okay, we'll just play these two little Spanish girls, and we love the Ghostbusters. We just love them. We're like the way people love Taylor Swift. We love the Ghostbusters. So, so we're writing it with Margaret, and we come to a line like, uh, uh, what was it? What?
Yeah. Who's your favorite
Oh
Ghostbuster?
yeah, and I said we're just improvising, while we're writing with Margaret. Margaret's at the typewriter, and we're just talking. And Margaret says, "Who's your favorite Ghostbuster?" And I say the black one, and we all laugh. And then Margaret says, "I'm gonna give that line to Julia," and I'm like, "But I said it." you know?
I said it.
And she says, "Yeah, but Julia, you said the last line, so this I'm gonna give this line to Julia." And so I'm thinking, okay, I mean that's I'm thinking, okay, all for one and one for all. Get Julia.
The line that Julia gives is funny, and to your credit, you maybe wrote it, but equally as funny, if not even more so, I think, is your reaction to her just going, he didn't do nothing, and you're kind of like doing like crazy person gestures, which you mentioned earlier, right? I love this fact that your Second City
Training.
Was pointing out the fact that you're a great reactor, and that's what is funny about this. And
Oh,
I just right, yeah.
that's yeah. I there were many reasons I loved my boss at Second City, who I mentioned earlier, Bernie Solins. But one was that he called Dick Ebersol one day in New York and said, "You're not using Mary right. She's a reactor. You got to let her
Yeah.
react to people." And that was dear of him to be.
One of your best reactions, one of my favorites, is where there's just panic when Jim Belushi during the jackpot wad he introduces the axe, and you're going, I don't know.
Yeah, that was the only time I've been in a sketch. That was the only time I was in a sketch with Christopher and Billy and who's
Marty is in it, and
Marty and Jim. Yeah. And Jim
And Pamela Stevenson.
and Pam Stevenson. Jim Jim and I were sort of thrown in because um
your panic in that is just so beautiful, though.
oh, thanks, but I did the most fake. At one point Jim is choking me and I did the most fake reaction to being choked. That's
Oh.
who is the brilliant actor who played the oh god, how can I forget his name right now? Um who played the character who married Seth Meyers?
Bill Hader,
Yeah,
who played
Hader.
Stefan.
Yeah, so one day I'm at my favorite cafe where I used to run into Billy Crystal, and I walk into the cafe and I see Bill Hader waiting to go into the one bathroom they have, a unisex bathroom. And again, as if I know him, I yell, "Bill!" and then, and
I love it.
I go over and we start talking. He says, "Oh my God, you were in one of my favorite SNL scenes," and he mentions that scene. And inside, I'm sort of falling apart because I'm thinking I didn't have much to do in that scene. I was just that lady who gets upset when Jim chokes me. But anyway,
You got to go back and watch it again, I think. Sorry to say that way, but your panic when he's screaming at you is
real.
is real and hilarious.
Yeah.
Well, Jim and I actually worked well together as in Chicago and a few times we could work together in New York. Yeah, I got along with Jim. Not everyone did, but I liked him.
I'm glad to hear that.
And I think he, after his brother died, I think he took it on upon himself to look after me a little bit in sort of a brotherly way.
That's nice to hear.
Yeah, so I have I did I mean Jim could be a troublemaker sometimes, but basically I found he had the same sort of soft side as John did. I mean,
Right.
John wasn't always nice to me. John came backstage once in Second City, and he was really high on whatever, and I was physically in his path, and he sort of punched me in the forehead with the palm of his hand to kind of get out of his way. And I remember thinking, "Oh, okay, this is the other John Belushi." But yeah, I like the Belushis. I miss them. I mean, I miss John, and I miss dear Judy. I'm sad that I didn't talk to her in the last many years.
Yeah. Um, Mary, I do have one more question on my list that I wanted to ask you about today. And that was we spoke about Eddie a little bit before. One of the things that has become very well known about Eddie's time at the show was that when he got into season 9, he pre recorded sketches for season 9. And there's sort of this mysterious SNL show that was recorded in September before season 9 started, where Eddie records a bunch of sketches and then Dick decides, okay, if Eddie can't make the live show, we're going to throw those sketches in. Do you remember anything about that day, that sort of like preseason show where you're recording sketches? And did it happen more than once during the season where you would record these extra sketches?
Oh, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I don't remember. I mean, I guess we were just going with the flow and doing what they wanted to do. They clearly wanted to keep Eddie's presence as long as they could, but I don't even remember that. I don't even remember that.
No
And
problem. Yeah, no, thank you.
again, we had no problem with whatever they wanted to do with Eddie. They were trying, I think the way many of us looked at it was like if the rumors we were hearing were true, that they were thinking about canceling us, and if Eddie's presence was going to help keep us having a job, by all means, bring in Eddie. you know,
Right.
so we had no bad feelings about that, and we liked Eddie. He was a very likable guy.
Well, we loved you on the show too, and this
Thanks.
was absolutely incredible to get to hear all these stories, Mary. I feel like I know you sort of like undersold it when we spoke before. You said, "Oh, I'm not sure if I'm going to remember a lot," but you remember so much, and people are going to love this. So, James, did you have anything else that you wanted to run by Mary, or are you good for tonight?
Just quickly to say this, and I'll frame it in a question, which I think is, you had mentioned to me previously, and I think at the front of the show, if memory serves, that uh, being on Saturday Night Live was not really something that you were necessarily aspiring or aiming for. And obviously, we just spent how much time talking about those seasons that you were there, and it's been over 40 years, and your memory is very, very good.
Thanks.
I heard someone, I think it may have been like Nora Dunn or somebody, say being on Saturday Night Live, and this is maybe an exaggeration, maybe it's not, I don't know. Being on Saturday Night Live means that you are going to talk about that every day of your life. Uh, that no matter what you've done, and you have done a lot of like films and TV, it's just a very, very, amazing career. And I've
Oh, trust me, I wanted to ask Mary all about Sabrina the Teenage Witch, so I'll I'll have to do that after the
Oh,
show because I love that show growing up. And Mary, I remember you on that show, and just that was so cool.
she always shows up at Christmas time in the Santa Claus as well,
you know,
Right, right,
in our
exactly. So
house. But
yeah.
I'm.
um,
I want you to finish your thought, and then I want to say something.
well, just to say thank you, but also to kind of go, is that true, or is that how you feel about? I mean, you run into somebody, or over the years when you maybe run into a fan or somebody who recognizes you. I mean, it's probably this crazy show, right?
I. Mm,
Or not always, but
as time passes, it's it's like when I was doing Sabrina, I did about 21 episodes of that, so people were talking about that. When I did Boston Legal, people were talking about that.
It was
Whatever I
great
did,
too.
people would refer to. But I'm going to say something that's probably not wise to say, but I'm going to say I had to. I don't know what the future is going to bring, but some years ago I had to just stop my career because of back problems and chronic pain, and and I feel sad because I'm gonna show up on all these lists of like, yeah, what became of her? Like I guess she couldn't get arrested, but
Well,
uh,
that's what makes this conversation so special. And of course, as I'm saying it, it's not released yet. But I know, I think John knows, I see him nodding, that this is going to be a treat, a true gift to people that really respect, admire, and adore you.
oh, thank you very much, thank you very much, and um, it's been a pleasure.
And also, Mary, I mean, I just want to reiterate, as you know, a younger person who got into the show and went back and watched your seasons, I can tell you that there's always new generations of SNL fans who fall in love with your performances on the show, and they're not, you know, looking up to look to see what happened to her. They're really just looking to want to hear from you, and I think that this is really like a blessing that we got to talk to you tonight, and a gift that we got to hear all of your stories. So just really just thank you for everything.
Oh, thank you. Now I'm gonna be crying, but that's really sweet of you. It was a blessing to do the show, and even though I thought, I could have been doing something else, who knows what I would have been doing? I don't know. I met a lot of friends I'm still friends with, like Robin and Margaret, and it was what a who gets an opportunity like that to go, even if it's only for 4 years and it's not 20 years or 12 years or whatever, even if it's only 4 years. Every week it's a new host, it's a new musical guest. I mean, I we were so busy on that show, I didn't even realize that Freddie Mercury was there. I mean, I
Right.
I did years later. I mean, maybe a couple years ago, I'm reading something about his last appearance was on SNL in 1980 something. I'm like, wait a minute, I was there that year. I didn't remember. Freddie was kind of keeping to himself because the story was that he had had a fight with a boyfriend the night before and he had lost his voice. So he was he had a big fight where he would been screaming. So he was, changing his plans as to what he was going to sing, something that would be less stressful, something that the drummer could back him up with uh, vocally. It was interesting, and I'm reading about this after the fact. Like, good God, I didn't know Freddie Mercury was in the house. How could that? How could that have happened? But you're so busy, focused on, okay, what wig? Where do I stand? What are my lines? What do I do? But anyway, thank you guys. Thank you for
Of
even
course.
giving me the time. And
Yeah,
what?
well, I think this is the impetus to get you back again, because I feel like there's more to talk about for sure another time, and perhaps maybe with one of your castmates, because I feel like when we have you guys on together, it always inspires new memories and stories and stuff like that. So I'll say thank you so much, Mary, and until next time.
Okay, and I know we'll talk again soon. Thank you guys. I had a lot of fun.
Thank you so much to Mary Gross for joining us on the Saturday Night Network tonight. And of course, James Stephens for helping us out with that interview. It was just so cool just to get to hear everything from Mary. My experience with her, I mentioned it a little bit at the end, but when I wasn't around when her seasons were airing, but I was very excited to see that she was a cast member. I had no idea, but I knew who she was because I used to watch Sabrina the Teenage Witch and she was one of the teachers there. I know this is aging myself, but but I was so excited to see Mary Gross, and she was so good. I think she's definitely one of the more underrated cast members ever. Really contributed to the show, had good range. I think that there were so many fun moments from her and and the fact that she was there for, so many changes from season 7, bringing in new cast members in season 8, and then a complete turnover practically in season 10. So some really cool stories from Mary. Just really proud of that interview that we had here today. A crazy story I'll tell you about the production of this interview. If you're still listening here at the end, you get a little bit of a bonus behind the scenes. So the day we recorded this with Mary, we've been asking Mary to do an interview for a few years now. I guess she's selective about what she wants to do, and we were really thrilled and fortunate that she wanted to do it. So as soon as she said yes, we're like, okay, we're going to make this happen. This is going to happen this day, when we recorded this a few weeks back. So I was very pumped about it. I was like doing some stuff with some family, come back to my house, and it is near the end of like a hurricane that came up here. I'm in Montreal, Canada. So it came up here and my power was off. And this is like, I've experienced power failures, but never right before a podcast, which is like really annoying. So I was trying to figure out what to do. So I was looking up like, okay, when's the power going to come back? Like trying to, we have like something called hydro up here. So we're trying to, find out from them when the power is going to come back. So I'm like looking, okay, it's going to come back in an hour. So I called Mary and I said, hey, Mary, I'm so sorry. I'm like, I don't want to push this any later, but can we just do it about an hour later? No problem, John. Like super sweet. I said, no problem. Okay. So we're getting a little bit closer to time to record. I'm like, I can't push this Mary interview back anymore. James, like, I think I'm just going to drive to one of my relatives' house and record the interview from there. And I've really never in almost, 4 years of doing this podcast recorded an interview outside of like this mini studio I have set up in my house. So I go and I drive out there and I get stuck on one of our highways because there's been so much flooding from this end of this hurricane that it is like bumper to bumper traffic and I'm not moving. And I'm looking at the clock. I'm like 5 minutes to go to the Mary interview. I was like, all right, I'll just figure it out. So I put my laptop on the passenger seat of the car and I hotspotted from my phone to my laptop and I plugged in my external mic that I was going to bring over, this microphone. And most of that podcast was recorded while I was driving. Like I wasn't moving. So like everything was very safe. Like I totally was safe, but I had the craziest podcast recording experience while I'm just basically sitting on the highway with the microphone. And then every time I was like, okay, is it a good time to speak? I'm not moving. Everything's good. Okay, let's go. And I'm like talking and there's like people in the cars that are like looking next to me, like trying to figure out what I'm doing. And I was like, oh, I'm just talking to Mary Gross. But anyways, it was a crazy experience. I'm glad the audio turned out really well. The fact that Mary wanted to do it on audio only sort of made the experience better. But, as you know, like I said, we have a lot of new listeners. I know you're getting to know me as a personality, some of the other personalities on this network. I figured it's fun to share a little bit behind the scenes. But sincerely, thank you all again for checking out the interview today. As I want to remind you, please leave comments because we want to hear your thoughts on this interview and maybe anybody else you want to hear from SNL Stories in our SNL Stories series. If you want to hear from them, just like put those names down in the chat for sure and reach out whenever you can. As for what's coming up here next, so we had a few shows this week. We just finished 7, 8, and 9 in our countdown series of the greatest hosts of all time. That's been really fun to do every week with Bill. We got 2 more weeks of that series. So next Monday night, we got 6, 5, and 4 coming up. And then the following week, we're going to reveal the top 3 greatest hosts of all time as voted by you. So that will be very fun. We'll talk about all the honorable mentions, everyone who didn't make the list. So you got to tune in for these last couple of weeks because I think it's going to be really fun to parse through the, best of the best on this list. So we have that. Last night I know we were releasing a lot for you this week, but last night we had a draft that we put out, which was really fun. It was an SNL alumni draft where we said, you know what, like Maya Rudolph's been already announced sort of as coming back as Kamala for season 50. I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of other alumni that are going to pop in. So let's make a game of it. So we did draft 40 SNL alumni on 8 different teams, and we're giving out a point system to see, if they pop up in an episode, they get a point or whatever. So go check that out. It was a really fun show if you are looking for something to listen to over the weekend in addition to this podcast. And yeah, we'll be back with more countdown stuff. And then as soon as we get some information from NBC and Saturday Night Live about season 50, including new cast members, who's going to be hosting those first 4 episodes. Once we have that information, Then we'll do some perhaps live content or the preseason roundtable that we do every year before the season. We'll also have a cast draft. Hopefully, we'll get everybody together for that. And then, we'll be back September 28th for the Hot Take Show, followed by the roundtable and by the numbers. So a lot of content coming over to you in the next few weeks. And to never miss any of it, you got to subscribe to the podcast, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen. It's going to be fantastic. So just all the stuff that we're going to get to talk about with season 50, I'm very excited about it. You can follow the podcast anywhere on social media at the SNL Network, and make sure to check out latenighter.com, our presenting partner for all of our shows, to never miss any of the episodes that we post. We post them on the website as well, and any of the articles that they post about late night television, whether it's SNL or anything else late night, all over there on latenighter.com. So appreciate them as always. All right. On behalf of James Stephens and Mary Gross, my name is Jon Schneider from the Saturday Night Network, and we will see you next time, everybody. Have a good one.